Hi, this is Dave in the IQ Center with another Cinema 4D tutorial. Today I want to talk about making blood vessels. There's lots of models that we create that require some kind of vasculature in the scene. So we have a few different ways to do this in Cinema 4D. So let's jump in and I'll show you the first one. So for most cases, I think the easiest, best way to do vessels is through something called a spline deformer. That is a deformer. It lives in here. And we need three different things to make this work. We need a spline for the vessel to follow, and we need a shape to wrap around the spline, and then we need the spline deformer. So let's make the spline first. So splines are up here in this orange pen. There are a couple different options. We're going to just use a spline pen to start off with. And I don't like to draw splines in the perspective view because it's hard to tell what plane they're going on. So I want to bring up the front view. So to do that, we middle mouse click the main view, brings up our fore view, and then we're going to middle mouse wheel click the front view, and that'll bring up the front view full screen. And so I'm just going to make a spline here. I'm going to click and drag to make a control point. Then I'm going to click and drag again to make another point. And I'm going to click and drag one more time. To stop the spline drawing, we press the escape key. Now we've got that spline. Now I want to make another branching vessel coming off of this. So I can't click on the spline and draw away from it. So I need to click a little bit away from my first spline to start a new one. I'm going to click here, and then I'm going to click and drag, and then click and drag again. And now we've got two splines. I'm going to press escape to stop drawing that. Now to bring this second spline close to the first one, now we can click and drag this first control point and drop it on the other one. So now we'll also have sort of a branching structure. So I'm going to middle mouse wheel click to bring up my fore view, and middle mouse wheel click on the perspective view to bring that up. And now you can see we've got a three-dimensional spline that's actually right along the y-x plane. And now we need a shape to wrap around that, and that's going to be, for a vessel, is a tube. So we drop a tube in here, and you can see that tube is much too large for the scale that we're using. So we're going to tell it to maybe have an inner radius of like 10 and maybe an outer radius of 12. And now you can see in here we've got this looks more appropriate for the size of our scene. And I'm going to turn on in display, turn on Garage Shading plus Lines to see the geometry in our tube. And you can see we're going to wrap this, we're going to try to curve this along the spline. And to do that, we're going to need more geometry on this tube. So the main thing we need is more height segments. So right now you see there are only 4 segments in the vertical direction. We want to make that somewhat much higher, 100 or more. And now you can see now this will wrap better. So now we need our spline deformer. So we're going to go into deformers, spline wrap deformer. And so maybe you remember from the deformer video that deformers work as children of objects. So we're going to need to drag our spline wrap onto the tube. So now the spline wrap is the child of the tube. And then we need one more piece of information. If I click the spline wrap in the object manager, you can see in the properties for the spline wrap object, there's a spot for a spline. So to make this wrap along the spline that we created, we have to drag the spline from the object manager into that spline shape. So once we do that, this is what happens, and this is what always happens. It's by default it wraps the wrong direction. Okay, and you can see here the axis for our spline wrap is plus X. This is a default setting. It needs to be plus Y. So we change plus X to plus Y, and then it looks right. So this is our and this is a our blood vessel. We can color it red, bring a material in here, drag the material on, and we have something that looks kind of like a blood vessel. And if you look at it from the top, it has a thickness. Looks fairly convincing. But the problem is down here at the bottom. If I move this around and look into the very bottom of this, what you see is the first vessel is just stuck in there. It's not actually a branching structure. It is just two tubes that are kind of jammed together. So this could be a problem if this is something large that you're working on. Let's say maybe this isn't a blood vessel. Maybe this is a windpipe that's dividing into two lungs, and you want to be able to see inside there. This isn't really going to work. So just keep this in mind. We're going to fix this in one of the other methods of making a blood vessel. But if these branching structures are, toward the middle where you can't see inside, this can be fine. It can work just great. If we turn off our lines, that looks pretty good. Let me show you one other thing you can do with the spline deformer, with the spline wrap deformer. You have the option of changing its scale over its length. So if I click the spline wrap deformer in the object, and then there is a little expandable area called size, and so we can take this size. This is like a graph, and if I grab the end of the graph and bring it down, you can see what happens. This is a graph of the size over the length, and you can also change the shape of this. So you can make it get smaller and larger. You can do all sorts of things with this. So that's a way to make it sort of shrink over its length, which you may want to do from time to time. All right, so that is basically how you use a spline wrap deformer to make a blood vessel. Next, we're going to use a volume builder, and I'm going to show you. Let's close this, and I'm going to open up something that we did in our deformer video. This is our little tumor that we created in the deformer video, and what I want to do is make some blood vessels that follow this shape. So we're going to try to do this using a volume builder. To do this, we need to make a spline that's going to sort of hug the surface of this, and we want to show like maybe some blood vessels that are on the surface of this this little tumor bump. So to do that, we need to use a spline, but we're going to make it stick to the surface. So how you do that? We're not use a spline pen. We're going to use the sketch tool in the spline menu, and we're going to use this little thing called snapping. So I'm going to enable snap, and once I enable snap, I get some options here. And one of the things, so we have vertex snap, edge snap. I have found that polygon snap works pretty well, so we're going to turn on polygon. And then what that means is the spline is going to snap to any polygons that it sees in the scene. So if I just kind of zoom in here and start clicking and drawing, you're going to see it kind of follows things. Now, one thing you'll notice is it's making a very jagged spline. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to turn up spline smoothing a little bit. You see how in the attributes for the sketch tool, there's an item called stroke smoothing. I'm going to bump that up a little bit, and now when I click and drag, it kind of makes a little bit smoother spline. And that is not quite smooth enough yet. I'm going to make that a little more. All right. And okay, let's give that a try. Okay, that's a little bit jagged still. I think one thing, let's try a midpoint snap. This is going to snap to the midpoint of the polygons, and that looks much better. Okay, so now I've made a spline, and I can make another spline here, and it's going to follow that surface. And if I rotate this around, you'll see that those splines actually kind of hug the surface of our model. But now we need to give those some volume. And we can do that using the volume builder. So in the main menu, there's a thing called volume builder. Put that in the scene. And the way volume builder works is you put something into a volume builder, and it creates voxels from that. So we're going to drag our spline into our volume builder, and you can see it makes this kind of weird shape that's not well defined, but you kind of get the idea of what's happening here. In the volume builder, we probably want to, it starts off with a voxel size of 10 centimeters. We can make that go down a little bit. And then the next step in a volume builder is to drag it into a volume mesher. So we got to go up to volume and then put a volume mesher in the scene. And when you drag a volume builder into a volume mesher, it makes a 3D mesh. So you can see that looks pretty good. So now we have blood vessels that are kind of hugging the surface. And what's great about this is you can actually go back to your spline object and bring up your sketch tool again, and you can do this in real time. I can drag some more, and they show up as volume splines already made. And we can put some color on that. And we have some nice blood vessels that are following that surface. And like the volume, and like the spline wrap tool, we can actually change this to scale along its length as well. So we can make it grow and shrink along its length. By using the, we have to click the spline in the volume builder object tab, and then use the graph to change that. Okay, so now this is great. It looks fantastic from a distance, but again, this still is not perfect if we need to have a real close-up of the edge of a vessel. You can see that the ends of our vessel are solid. They're just sort of like round ends, and in most cases, if we're going to see the edge, we want to see it cut off. This would be fine for a lot of situations, but there was one situation. Someone asked about making something that looks like this. Let me bring up this. Here's a model that is in Sketchfab, and you can see if I zoom in on some of these edges, you can see inside the vessel, and you can see how they intersect, and they intersect cleanly. And so we may, I can look in here. You can see that where these two vessels intersect each other. So we may want to do something like that. So let me show you that that situation. Go back to Cinema 4D. And let's make a simpler scene to explore that this possibility. All right, so I'm going to make a new scene. I'm going to make a simple spline, front view. I'm going to choose my spline tool, and again, we're just going to make a sort of a branching Y. Okay, and I'm going to move them close together. Middle mouse wheel, click the perspective view. Now we're in a similar situation as we were before. Now I'm going to use the mesh builder to make a vessel out of that. So we put in the volume builder and drag Spline's volume builder, and in the volume builder make the voxel size a little smaller, then take the volume builder and put it in a volume mesher. And now we've got something that looks like this. If I turn on garage shading plus lines, you can see that we have ends on here. We want to be able to see down the end of these. So we're going to need to edit this. And I can't select the individual polygons while this is part of a volume mesher. So what I need to do is make this into an object, and I do that by right-clicking on my volume mesher and do current state to object. So I'm right-clicking and selecting current state to object. What that does is it makes a copy of my model as a polygon object that doesn't require any volume mesher. So you could hide the volume mesher and if you wanted to use it again, but I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. So now we have a polygon object, and since I have a polygon object, I have the option to use these tools on the far left. And so I'm going to select polygon mode. That lets me select individual polygons, and in my selection options up in the upper left, I'm going to choose a rectangular selection. And I'm just going to use this to cut off the top of this. Okay, so I'm going to select some polygons on the top here, cut them off here. I'm going to move to the bottom and cut those off. Okay, so now what you see here is this does have an appropriate junction. You can see that it's kind of a you get a good geometry in the junction, but it has no thickness, and the blood vessel needs to have some volume of its own. So now we need to do this. We need to do the volume mesher step one more time. So we're going to go to volume builder, then I'm going to drag this thing into the volume builder, and now you can see it's made voxels out of this. It's kind of hard to tell even what's going on here. I can make the voxels much smaller, and that will help to see what's going on. And you can see that it's making voxels out of the outside hull of this, which is what we want. Now we take that and drag it into a volume mesher, and it disappears. And this is a problem with how the volume mesher is attaching itself to the voxels. It's using too small of a range, so it is not creating any geometry. So what we need to do is, in our volume mesher, we need to take the voxel range and move it up, and then you'll start to see it form. So if you have this number too low, it's not going to make any geometry, and we just want to make it up this, to maybe 70%. And now you can see we've got nice vessels that have size, they have some thickness, and the junction is proper. If I go inside here, you see that we actually have we don't have two separate pieces jammed together. We have a branch, and this is difficult to do, and so we've struggled with this over the years and how to make this, and I think that this is a good solution. So those are two ways. We've got the spline wrap, deformer. We have using the volume builder and volume mesher in two different ways. Next, I want to show you a method of doing this using texture painting. Okay, so let's switch back over to our tumor sample, and let me show you an issue with the way that this is done. So we have our little tumor that is that's kind of sticking out of the surface, and as I showed you in the displacer, there's a way we can move this around, and you see what happens. Those vessels are fixed, and so as we move our little tumor around, they don't follow. This next method of making blood vessels will fix that problem and offer a different way of doing small capillaries that you don't need a lot of detail with. So let's go ahead and delete the thing that we created earlier, and I'm going to show you a way of painting. Now, there's a longer video on how to paint textures. This is going to be really quick, and you'll need to go back to that video if you are stuck in a way in how to do this. So, what we're going to do is bring up our 3D paint. So from the layout, we're going to switch from standard to 3D paint. Okay, so and we're going to choose the paint setup wizard to make a texture. We only have one object in this scene, the subdivision surface, which is our whole model, and so it's checked. I'm going to hit next, and it's giving me recalculate UVs. We're going to use optimal cubic mapping. And here it's asking what color to use and what size. This is pre-filled in because I've done this before, but we want to choose a color, and we want to make it the color that we want our base to be. So because it's going to color the entire object with whatever we select here. So I'm going to click OK, and we're going to use a 2K texture, 2048 by 2048, which is a good medium texture dimension. If these will be blank if this is the first time you've done this, so you need to know that this is powers of 2. You need to be 1024 or 2048 or 4096, but 2048 by 2048 is a good number. We're going to hit finish, and we're going to hit close. What that has done is made us a material. And this is from a previous video, so I'm gonna delete that. This is our new material right here, and you can see that it has one channel, color. Okay, so you see that says C, and there's a little pen by it. So now, if I color on my scene with this, if I click this color, it's going to tell me what color it is, and we have kind of a red color. And if I click and drag on my model, you can see it draws on there with red, and that looks okay. If I turn off my lines, you can see that this might be an option. But there's another way to make this look more convincing as a blood vessel, and that is to put a bump channel. So we want to draw with texture, and so on the texture tab of our material, you see up here there are material channels. So I gotta select this material, and with the material selected, now I can go material channels, and we can add a bump. Okay, and what this is going to do is going to make a whole new texture that is just going to record bump, which is a kind of a way of tricking the eye into perceiving depth. So we're going to add a bump channel, and we're going to make it the same as our texture channel, 2048 by 2048. I'm going to click OK, and now you see what happens is now we have two channels in our material. We have one material, but two channels, color and bump. All right, and by default the bump channel will be black, which means there's no effect. And what we want to do is color on it with white. So if I click here and click color, I can choose a color. And what I want to do is paint on there with white, which means I'm painting a bump onto the surface. Okay. Now, if I go back to materials, and you see these, there are little pens on each one of these. The one that is highlighted is the one that's going to be coloring. So if I have bump selected, and I click and drag on my object, you see what happens? It makes a bump in the surface, and with no color. And you can see it's not actually changing the geometry. And if I go really close or from the edge, you can see it's not actually making it tall, but it looks like it's making some shape on there. And this is what the bump channel does. And if I uncheck bump channel and check color, I will draw with just the color. But if I check them both so that they're both highlighted, I get this look. And you see what it's coloring red and giving it a bump. It sort of looks like a little blood vessel on the surface. So now we can back up and we can draw this. Rotate it around. We can look at the brush shape by clicking mode and hit tool, and that will change our view to brush. And then we can change the size of our brush a little bit lower. We can make different size. and that was a little mistake there. We have to be able to see what we're drawing on. So you can make a few different sizes here. And we can even make it a little bit smaller. And make some smaller vessels. So if you want to make a really detailed microvasculature, this is doesn't take as much computer power as drawing a whole bunch of little tiny actual blood vessels out of polygon objects. And this is just painted onto the surface. So what that means is we can still be able to move our, if I go back to standard layout, go to our displacer and press the move tool, we can move this around and it moves under it. Now you'll notice one thing here. When I moved to the standard layout and I got out of paint, everything looked worse. And see how boxy that stuff looks? It doesn't look nearly as good as it did before. And that's because of there's something called a default preview with every texture. So the texture that we just made is right down here. It's called matte in the material manager. Okay, so if I click on matte in the material manager, in the attributes for that material, there's a tab called editor. And this is what the editor is seeing while we're displaying this. So the editor has a texture preview size, and it's set to default. And the default is low resolution, and that's to make it update faster. But if we want to see what it's going to look like, we can change default to whatever our texture size is. So we made our texture 2048 by 2048, 2K. So I click that. And now all of a sudden everything looks normal again. It looks the way it did in the paint preview. And what's nice about this is painted onto our surface. So as our surface moves, so does all the detail. So if I take our displacer and move it around, those blood vessels stick to it. So that's kind of a nice feature. If you're animating something and you want that surface to stay with the surface, that will help. It's also much less. It takes much less computational power to make a lot of detail. So if you made all of these out of very high resolution polygons, it might slow down the computer to the point where it won't update properly. And this is how games get away with making highly textured looking features in a very complex scene. A lot of it's done not with geometry, not with actual polygons, but with maps that are painted onto surfaces. And so this kind of looks real. It looks like it has depth, but it's a trick that's happening in the computer. So that is texture painting. And if you have if you need more information about the painting process, there's a separate video about painting onto surfaces. So that is what I have for blood vessels. Thank you for watching.